Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us once again for our weekly class, and I appreciate you all joining us and being part of this unbelievable and important topic that we are talking about, about Lashon Hara, to make sure that we always are thinking at least about what we should be saying or what we shouldn't be saying. So last week, if you guys remember, I'm assuming you don't because no one actually sent me a reminder. It's okay. I mentioned that I wanted to go through some of the categories of Toelas. Some of the rules, not categories, but some of the rules of even when something seems to be appropriate, like the examples that we had the last couple of weeks, sorry. We'll just go over them quickly. When you have a good-natured friend, right, who wants to help give someone a job, and you know the kid or the person that he's giving it to is offering, has had trouble in the past, right, has been caught doing drugs, stealing, things like that. Another scenario we had was when you have a competition that's fighting against you and saying bad things about you. So we said, of course, you're not allowed to, but you have to ask a Rav how you could do things. But when would you be allowed to tell your customers, hey, you know, you're getting a raw deal out of him because if you really think about it, the kind of tires he's giving you or the kind of products that he's giving you, they're really old. Are you allowed to do that? You're not allowed to do that. And you want to just really do it for Tealas to help your customers out, and you benefit from it, right? So scenarios like that where there could be a benefit factor. We said in cases in the past where a teacher wants to know about a student from the past years. So, what are you allowed to say? Well, you're not allowed to say. So there's a group of things, and I'm sure we'll see as we progress. Day 27. We actually did day 27. Sorry, Emily. We did do day 27 last week. Day 27 was about when you know someone that has a drinking problem and you want to help them out. Are you allowed to, try to stop them? Are you allowed to tell them or, get involved a little bit, to tell his rabbi, tell his mentor to try to help him out? So things where it's benefit for the person themselves, but you're telling someone else. And so we are actually up to page 28, day 28. So there's a whole group of things, and I'm sure we'll see more of where there's, to a certain degree, we said you're allowed to because you're really out there to help the person, but there are some categories, which I'm sure they will get to later in this book. As I said, it's the first time going through this English book, so I don't know the order. But I just want to share my screen for a minute. I did a little research to see if people have, not to reinvent the wheel. I'm very big into that. Other places that I put together sort of a little chart of some of the things that we're supposed to think about or reflect on before we start talking, even when it's Tayalis, even when it is for a purpose. So I want to share my screen. Let's do this one. This is more clear. Okay, so y'all see my screen?
It doesn't, yeah.
Yeah, now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so I have to move this over 1 second. Let's close this. There we go. Okay, so this is from actually, I think, Atlanta, I think it was. I didn't notice which organization in Atlanta, but either the Kollel or the Shul, that they put this together, just to give credit where credit is due. So let's just go. They have 7 steps over here. The one has to think about. The 7 steps, just making it larger. All right, the 7 steps that one has to think about when they're going to start speaking. So the 7 rules of Te'alis. Let's just go through this. When is it okay to tell? Number 1, you have to be certain that the information is accurate. And what does that mean? Right? Did you witness it yourself? And please, at any point in time, please speak up. Okay, I cannot see the chat. And if someone has a question, please speak up, unmute yourselves, and speak up, because this is very, very. It's all very important, but this is very, very important. All right. Did you witness it yourself? If not, did you investigate and verify the matter beyond the doubt? So remember, if you remember many classes ago, many weeks ago, we spoke about, if some famous person was being prosecuted by the government, right? And it's in the papers and it's in this and that. Remember, we spoke about this. Are you allowed to gossip about it? Are you allowed to talk about it? Are you allowed to use it as an example? Right? Hey, look, you see how careful we have to be. One of the criteria we spoke about, if you remember, right, was that you have to make sure that the information is true. And just because people are gossiping about it, just because it's in the papers, doesn't necessarily mean it's true, right? And therefore, if you don't know, it's not without a reasonable doubt yet that the person actually did this, right? So then, just because it's in the papers doesn't mean to say that you have the right to go ahead and talk about it, right? And that's what number two is. If you didn't see yourself, which a lot of times you don't, right? And you have to investigate, you have to verify, you have to make sure that the material is true. And number three, if the information is heresy, you must make that clear, right? So you have to make sure that it's clear, right? That it's not clear, it's not this, it's not that, right? You have to be very clear with your words. Because again, rule number one is you have to be certain the information is accurate. So let's just give an example of the examples that let's just put it practically, the example that we talked about beforehand, right? Let's talk about day 26. It's a good case study. So in day 26, we spoke about the scenario, right, where you have a good-natured friend who wants to hire a troubled kid, right? A troubled teen, troubled kid, troubled adult. Right? Doesn't make a difference, right? You know that this kid has had trouble in the past. So first and foremost, number one, if you're allowed to tell the person, you first have to make sure, right, that the information that you have is true. It's not because you heard about Chaim Yankel's kid, right, he had trouble in school, and he was a troublemaker. The father had to send him out to yeshiva. I went to special boarding school, whatever, and everybody knows. Everybody knows. It's like that's what they talk about over the herring, right? It's like that. It can't be that way. It has to be that you actually have information firsthand. Information about the knowledge about this thing, that it's actually true, right? And either you've seen it or you verified it. You for whatever reason somehow you were able to verify the information, right? Through speaking to people, through knowing people firsthand that've seen it. Again, how you found out, that could be a problem unless it was tailored for you, right? I don't want to. That's where the question is, how do you find out? Because how is that person allowed to tell you the information if it wasn't TLS, if it wasn't for a purpose to help you out? So that's sort of getting interesting, right? If it's, there was a video or whatever it is, you've seen things, but be it as is, you have to make sure that the information is true. That's rule number one. Any questions on that? Okay. So let's move on. Let's go to rule number two. Rule number two, right? You have to be sure that a wrong has been committed. Even though you judge the action to be wrong, find out if it's permitted by halacha, and check out, right? It's not clear. 1 second. Right? Of the event, maybe your perception is skewed, right? You have to make sure that what happened was wrong, right? So there's social things that seem to be wrong. There are maybe legally there's certain things that are maybe wrong. But now I don't want to get into the whole debate when it's against the law, but according to Torah, it's not really a problem, right?
Sorry.
I don't want to get into that right now. That's an interesting question and debate of how do you work with that, right? But even though you judge the action is wrong, right? You saw some kids, when they're teenagers, they acted a certain way, and they're rough and they're tough, and then they're bully kids or whatever it is, or they were doing some stuff. Just because for your senses, right, for you, who you are, you feel that that's wrong behavior and that's a wrong way, and that makes them unreliable and things like that, right? You have to make sure that halakhically it's actually something that's wrong, right? You have to make sure that what you're talking about, just because that's your feelings, just because that's sort of how society portrays it, right? You have to make sure that that's actually something wrong before you start talking about it. Okay, number 3, you have to speak to the wrongdoer first, right? So this is an interesting one, right? And we'll see. There's another one we'll go through, right? That sort of brings it out a little different, right? But you have to speak to the wrongdoer first, right? Try to pressure him to rectify his behavior. You're not allowed to consider approaching the victim unless you have done this first, right? Only if the wrongdoer refuses to correct the wrong can you consider, right, sharing the information. So in the scenario over here, it seems like they're talking about a case, and again, every situation is slightly different, when someone did something wrong to someone else, and now you feel that it will be benefit for that person to know, right? That person to know about what that person did for you, to you, right? And because it's important for this person to know that this person talked about him or acted in a certain way, or scratched their car or whatever it is, right? Whatever that may be, right? As I said, I cannot see the chats. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. So it's important to remember, right? In their scenario, again, we're not talking about our kind of scenario where you're telling someone else that maybe they have a job or something like that, but it's more, right? It's more of a scenario. Bonnie, please ask as I said, please ask the questions. I cannot, since I'm sharing my screen, it's hard for me to see the chat. So in our scenario where it's not against the person, right? So it'll be, this one might not be so applicable, right? Because you could go ahead and speak to the kid and say, hey, have you changed your ways? Do you remember, you know what you did wrong, right? But the kid might say, yeah, of course I changed my ways. But if you know that he hasn't changed his ways, or you know that this will, definitely still be a difficulty, by talking to the kid is not necessarily, or the person not necessarily going to make a difference or not, right? Because every scenario is different. The case they're talking about is, I'm assuming, is when someone did wrong. Chaim Yankel did something wrong to Moshe, right? And now you want to tell Moshe what Chaim Yankel did, right? And that way, right, you feel that will be benefit for the person, right, regarding what Chaim Yankel did. So in that scenario, you definitely have to speak to Chaim Yankel, right? You have to speak to him, right, and make sure. Now, we spoke about the scenario of when you did something wrong to someone else, right, that you yourself should not go ahead and tell that person, because you might create animosity between the two, right? You might have to suffer with knowing that knowledge. In this scenario, it's the same thing. We spoke about the concept of giving tachacha, giving rebuke to someone else. Right? Giving rebuke to someone else is only if that person will listen to you. So if you know that that person doesn't give a hoot about you, right? If you know that that person won't listen to you, right? So then it might be detrimental by approaching that person, right? So what are you supposed to do? Right? So if you know for sure the person's not going to listen to you, and by you going and approaching, you're just going to now create animosity between the two of you, right? So then, if you look at the next thing, if you're certain that he hasn't listened to you, you're not obligated to, right, miss him. So if you're certain that he's not going to listen to you, right, you know the guy, you've had scenarios before and things like that, and all it did was create fights and animosity and anger and things like that. So then, right, not necessarily do you have to go ahead and do step 3. Right? Step 3, again, is in a scenario where you are telling someone something that someone did to you, and therefore you have to approach that person to make sure that they're not going to do it again. They don't want to hurt that person again. So then the toelas, is not applicable. That's sort of the logic behind it, right? Because if you could get the person to admit that they did something wrong, and if you could get the person to say, I'm not doing this again, right? So then there's really no benefit for you to tell Moshe what Chaim Yankel did, right? Now it's just gossip, because even though you verified information, right? Even though you know that it's against halacha and you know that what the person did was actually something wrong and it's going to hurt the person, right? But still, right? If the person's not planning on doing it again, so then it's water under the bridge. What can you do? You can't change the past, right? What's it going to help the person to know what that person did to them, right? When you can't change it, right? So therefore, that's why this step is very important in this scenario. In our case, right? In our case, where we're talking about you giving information to someone else about someone's actions of who they are, so then you have to make sure that that person is still doing the wrong. And that really falls under category number 1 and number 2, right? Because what they did was what they did. That's the past. The question is if they're still doing what they're doing. And so it's not necessarily you have to speak to the person. You have to find that information. If it's through speaking to the person, if it's through having evidence that they're still doing it now, right? You find them in the street corner, or you find them behind, the Walmart parking lot with hanging out with some people or whatever it is, and they're still taking drugs or whatever the scenario is, whatever the case is, right? So then you have firsthand knowledge that they're doing still what they did, and therefore it will be harmful for this person. So not necessarily do you have to go ahead and speak to that person directly. Any questions or comments so far? Okay, so let's move on. Number 4, right? You have to be careful, right? Not to, right? You can't make things up, right? You can't go ahead. Be careful. Be extra careful in a situation where you are emotionally involved. Not to exaggerate. Not to make things more. Not to. It's part of human nature, right? As we all know, you climbed up the hill. Oh my gosh! And all of a sudden it became, Mount Everest, and it's, there was snow and there was sleet, and you you're not sleeping for 5 days, and it's your feet were frostbitten, and oh my gosh, the story turned into this unbelievable experience, and that's part of human nature, right? Okay, I'm exaggerating there, right? but it's part of our nature to blow things up, as we call it, right? To add on adjectives and to sort of make the story more juicy, right? That's sort of part of who we are. You have to be very careful that you stick to the facts, right? Be very careful. Just for our example, right? He's hanging out with this crowd and he's taking drugs, and he might even have tattoo. I don't know what he's doing. That's adding on things that A, you have no facts, B, are non-relevant, right? Just say, hey, listen, I just wanted to let you know, right? I felt it was important. I spoke to my rabbi, right? That, it's very beautiful that you're giving this kid a chance, and I'm not saying not to, but I think it's just important that you know that this kid is taking drugs, and that might affect his job. That's it. What kind? Not he's taking ecstasy, he's taking this, he's taking, oh my gosh, right? He's snoring. That's not relevant. That's not relevant. The point is that he's going to be impaired to a certain degree by taking substance, right, or whatever it is, right? So and also in any scenario, if someone did something wrong to someone else, and you feel that it's important for them to know, someone's car got keyed by someone, and you saw it happen, right? And you want to tell the person because it's important for the person to know. Maybe you could, get money back from the person or whatever. Approach the person, and again, you have to find out what exactly the toelis, if there's something that can be done, right? If nothing can be done, so then all you're doing is creating fights in between the two people, right? But if, let's say, there is, you can't make a whole dramatic story. I saw them rolling down the street in their, in their bikes or their, whatever it is, and they took out their keys and they scratched the whole thing and they were laughing away. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but that's not the point. The point is that you saw this person's, key the car, and that's it. That's it. To the point. Straight to the point. Right? Not to make it all dramatic, because by adding emotion, adding drama, right, you are also creating you're building up the other person's emotion, And when you say things, Matt, it's we've said this before. Kamayim panim al panim. What does kamayim panim al panim mean? Kamayim panim al panim means to say the way you perceive, the way you feel inside, that's how other people feel also, and that's how other people see it. Right. So if you are all built up with your emotion, if you are, all giving the adjective, so then the other person, when they hear the story, their blood starts boiling too, because it's contagious how you feel. And if you just say it in matter of fact, they'll be upset. They might start, their blood might start boiling or might not. But you're not doing anything to be contagious of your emotions, of how you feel, and to make it that you want to start, getting the other person's emotions going, right? And that's a problem. Okay, let's do number 5. All right. Oh, they have 7 over here. All right. Your intentions must be only to help the person who is being victimized, and this is so important. All right. This is so important. All right. All right. Even if you feel ill towards the person, right? Right. You're not allowed to repeat it, even for constructive purposes. Listen. You don't like this kid. This kid, when they were a teenager, right? They always dumped your garbage out, right? Because they were high, right? They always, climbed the fence into your backyard and whatever, right? Could just imagine what teenagers do, right? Boys especially, right? But it's this. So you still have ill feelings for the kid, right? Or for the individual, right? It's this guy's always been your competition, right? And you really feel that the information is true. The guy is cheating his customers. He's putting in bad tires. He's putting in bad brakes. He's whatever. He's doing all that stuff. But you've had this lifelong, competition. You have the rivalry. So when you're saying it, and yes, you want to help your customers and you want to make sure that people don't have bad brakes, but at the same time, there's ill feelings inside of you. You're coming still from a place, right, that's ill feelings, right? And that is not allowed. This is so important. It's such an important piece, because the other things are easier. It's more facts. Find out the facts.
What's not allowed?
To say something.
But if the person's going to cheat them,
doesn't matter. You are not allowed to, because now you are not doing it just for Teyalis. You're also doing it out of anger. And that's lo sachal rachel b'amacha. You're not allowed to peddle information out of hatred. Remember, the bottom line of Lashon Hara, as we mentioned, good question, Emily, right? The bottom line of Lashon Hara is that you are creating hatred. You're creating a masidim between the two. And if you have ill feelings, right? You have ill feelings, as I mentioned before, it will come out that way. As much as partial you try to be, it will come out that way, and you're creating now ill feelings. You're creating not just helping your friends or helping people from not being cheated, but you're also, it's automatic. You're also saying something in a ill way. And that's Lashon Hara. To the extent, if you remember, we said, if you said something to someone and it hasn't reached the person yet, right? And you want to go ahead and rectify what you did. You want to ask Mechila, right? Or whatever it is. And you want to go tell, I'm so sorry I said this about you, or I did this to you. And you know that the person's going to feel really bad. And you're going to create sinas chinam, baseless hatred, and you're not sure if the person will be able to get over it or not. You're not allowed to go ahead just because you want to ask Mechila, right? You're not allowed to go ahead and do it. You have to suck it up and say, I'm the loser over here, right? We gave ideas that around Rosh Hashanah time or Yom Kippur, right? Try to give a general Mechila, if I ever said anything, whatever, and you have in mind that thing, right? And try to ask that way and try to get the person to forgive you for anything that happened. The past is the past. I don't remember, things might have happened, right? But you're not allowed to go ahead and say something to the person, because the bottom line, and that's why it's intertwined. Ahavat Yisrael, the love of our fellow, right? And Lashon Hara are intertwined with each other, because the bottom line, Lashon Hara is a tool and a utensil of creating sinat chinam, hatred, a baseless hatred. And when you
sometimes doesn't it in some way depend on the level of risk?
Say that again.
Yeah. I asked, doesn't it in some way depend on the level of risk?
What do you
Okay.
mean by the level of risk?
Okay.
Of what the person did,
Where
or?
I'm coming from. Okay, let's say you've got little kids. You are thinking about hiring somebody as a babysitter, caregiver for your little kids. I happen to know that this person has some background as a perpetrator of some kind of abuse. Yeah, of course I have negative feelings towards that person, but isn't it more important to let you know that information rather than for you to hire that person and put your kids at risk?
Okay, so okay, you bring out a good point. So let's clarify something. Good point. I need to clarify something. If there's a physical harm to someone, right, that might be a physical harm, right? So then you have to intervene, right? Because someone is physically, you can't let someone physically get harmed, right? If this person, when they were younger, they did mischief and they changed and this and you're the one that got hurt by it because you gave them benefit for doubt when they were teenagers and you allowed them to be a babysitter and they just trashed your house, they took advantage, whatever it is, and now it's 5 years later, right? The person changed, or it seems like they changed, right? So then no, then not necessarily allowed to say something to someone because directly, right? Because you're very biased, not you, but the person is very biased because you were hurt by this person. You see things in a very different lens, and I want to clarify. This is also, it's because even though you might have took care of the other things by verifying on this and that, but at the same time, your glasses are very dirty, right? As the famous parable goes, if you have ketchup in your glasses and you see ketchup everywhere, ketchup's not on the other person's shirt, ketchup's not on the door, and ketchup's not on the chair, and ketchup's on your glasses. And so therefore, everything else looks like there's ketchup, right, on the table and on the shirt and on the door and whatever it is, because there's some ketchup on your glasses, right? So the idea of being hurt by someone else and having emotional ill will or a grudge, as we say these days, a grudge against someone else, that a lot of times also fogs our glasses, taints us and how we see things and how we would say it over, right? So if it's the person's a pedophile, right? So then you have to say something, right? You do, and we do, right? And typically there's organizations that verify that and things like that, right? There's a whole debate if someone was a pedophile and they changed and they went through therapy and now they moved to a new community, right? And the person, really says they changed and they, and they went for help and they went and they regret what they did, right? So then there's a whole question, and again, I'm not getting involved. There's people that are much more know more about this, but I'm just saying in such a scenario, right? So then you have to be careful because the person went for help and the person changed and he said he's changing and things like that. The question is how much and how not, and keep an eye on him or have someone keeping an eye on him, right? Him or her, right? But we're talking about in a normal scenario, right, where it's things might, for example, like this, like the person's business might get hurt a little bit, right? So by that information, you have to make sure that it's coming from a proper place. Now, what should you do? There are ways of getting around it. Right? Let's say you still have this information. We'll see. So number 6, right? You should try to do number 6, right? Which is, I want to finish number 5, but if you can get the same results without speaking Lashon Hara, you have to use that option, right? So sort of trying to, give, just, you could say, listen, I just think you should look more, I think you should do a little more background check on this individual, right? Are you sure you want to hire, right? Maybe you should look a little more, it's always good to do more background checks on new people that you're hiring, or have a good sit down with them and see what their status is and how their ability of understanding. And I think it's important for everybody, for anybody that you hire, you should do that, right? To sort of try to include them in other people. And then again, bottom line is, as we said before, and sometimes in a scenario like this, you'll have to ask the Rav. If it's the Rav will feel that it's taka something that is dangerous for the person or really harmful or could really ruin them, so then he might say that, maybe write a letter that it's not coming out it's not coming, you're not expressing all your emotions. You be careful how you write it, right? You put just the letters, just the word itself down. But the idea again is that when you speak, and if you have ill will, right, a lot of times you see things in a different way. And number two, you're still saying it because you feel ill about the person and not necessarily because it's the toelas. And in Lashon Hara, when you speak, a lot of it has to do with your intentions. In other mitzvot or avirot, it's not so much, right? You shake the lulav, right? Yes, it's important to have in mind that you're shaking the lulav, right? But when you're shaking the lulav, you're thinking about, you're thinking about Hanukkah, right? You still fulfill your obligation of shaking the lulav, right? You make the blessing, sort of as an underlining concept that you that you're shaking the lulav, even though you're not thinking about it, right? Or if one eats pig, right, a ham, and he has intention when he's eating ham to be eating a good roast, good Jewish roast, right, on Friday night, but he's eating ham, right? It doesn't make a difference, right? He's still eating ham. It doesn't make a difference what he's thinking, right? He or she is thinking, right? So by most of the mitzvot, it doesn't matter what your feelings are or what you're thinking. It's the action that you do, right? It's important to have a good thought, and it's you get connected to the mitzvah more by thinking about the mitzvah and reflecting on the mitzvah, right? But you fulfill it, or you transgress it. By Lashon Hara, right? When there's a fine line, your feelings matter, right? Your feelings always matter, my friends, right? But in Lashon Hara, your feelings matter, right? Because the way you are, what is propelling you to say what you're saying, right, makes a difference. It's a thin line if you're doing it for constructive purposes, or you're doing it because you just want to get something off your chest and you found now an avenue to do that. Toelas. Oh, look, I'm finally able to rat this kid out. I'm finally able to speak about this person because I got toelas on my side, right? Then it's coming from a bad place. And Lashon Hara has to do with your feelings, right? With your thought of why you're doing something, and not like other mitzvot. Good question. Anybody want to follow up on that or comments on that?
Yeah, can I just go back to the babysitting scenario, but not abuse, right?
Yeah,
But
go
let's
ahead.
say you had someone come and babysit your kid, right? And I don't know, you came home and they had 4 friends over, or whatever it is, or I don't know, they ate all the food in your pantry, or I don't know, like they did something that was like not okay. Maybe eating all the food is not a good example, but let's say, I don't know, whatever it is.
Yeah, I understand.
Maybe they even stole something. And then your friend wants to use them for babysitter like a week later, not 4 years later or whatever it is, but like a week later, they're like, oh, I was thinking of hiring so-and-so to babysit. Like you're just supposed to just not say anything. Like, okay, they're going to survive. Their kids are not going to get hurt, right? But maybe they'll steal a piece of jewelry, or maybe I don't know, maybe they'll do something inappropriate. Like,
Yelling at your kids.
Maybe you are annoyed. Maybe you're annoyed at them, but like you also don't want your good friend to have to go through the same thing you just went through.
Right. Cindy, I heard what you said, yelling at your kids. Yeah, that's a no-no to a certain degree. It's an excellent question, right? So first and foremost, what you have to try to do is try to accomplish other things. Number one, verify. Number two, try to approach them. In a scenario like that, you're definitely able to approach them. Say, hey guys, what do you do? Why do you do this? Right? Is this something, this is wrong? And could say, listen, this could, you guys want to get involved in babysitting, and this could really ruin your ability to babysit, and see how they react. Now, I'm assuming the question is coming from, you did all that, right? And they still are, oh, we never really did. Well, we lost. No, yeah, what, the kids made the mess. Right? It wasn't us, right? We didn't steal, right? So, I'm assuming that's you already try to take care of all the other scenarios. So it's a good question, right? It's a very good question, and I don't necessarily have the right answer. Um, but in such a scenario, you have to see if it's really coming from your emotions. It is to a certain degree. Listen, anytime that you are wrong, right, it's coming from emotion, right? And you're trying to help someone else out because you were wrong, right? When it's someone else, so then you could very definitely, check your emotions at the door and move on because it wasn't really you. And in this scenario where it was you, it definitely has an emotion in there. But I could hear that if you are not able to, if you're not able to take care of it, right? So then there might be a leeway to actually tell someone. I won't say about, it's just more of a general thing, right? Because when you talk about general, so then it's more, say, I would, I just use that kid, it wasn't the best experience. All right. If you remember, we gave examples, how to try to avoid speaking lashon hara, right? By change your words, the way you present things. It's very important, right? If the person asks you, "Oh, how is your experience with that person?" Say, I'd rather not answer, right? Now, by saying I'd rather not answer, you're right. That is sort of saying something, right? But at the same time, you're not really saying something. You say, we didn't have the best experience, but it could be every house is different, every kid is different, every scenario is different. So you're sort of allowing the person to know that there's something wrong, right? But at the same time, sort of trying to check your emotions at the door. Now, if the person calls out and tries to really get the information of what it was, right? So then you could just say, listen, I'm telling you that it wasn't the best scenario. You decide what you want to do. I can't divulge anymore, right? You could call the person and talk to them, a kid, and say, hey, what's going on, right? You could take my heat or you cannot, but I don't want to get into. I feel that if I get into details, it's lashon hara. There's no difference of what the details are. I'm just telling you that we didn't have the best experience, and by not giving the details, right? You're giving more of a general thing. So yes, you're talking about the person, but you're not saying specifically what the person did wrong, right? So you're keeping to a certain degree your emotions in the doorway, and now you're allowing that person to reflect on what they want to do. Now, what they do next is their decision. Personally, if I heard that from someone, right, I would look into it. I'd try to find out. I'd see what other people have the same feeling, or I'd say, hey, listen, why is this person? Why are people warning me to have you as a babysitter? Or I'd stay away, right? Depends how desperate I am, right? So it's now sort of putting it to the other person to decide what they want to do. That's sort of what I would do. If they stole something, so that's something wrong. That's wrong. That's gneva, right? And anyways, the kid should be taken care of, and you should try to get your stuff back, and then information might come out that way. Anyways, speak to the person's parents, right? If they have control over them, right? But sort of that's. I know I'm humping and pumping a little bit, right? But it's not. It's a hard question. And you know what? In such a scenario, it depends on what exactly happened. You might have to ask a Rav and say, "Hey, listen, what am I allowed to say? What am I not allowed to say?"
Thank you.
Any other questions on this? Okay, so let's try to finish off over here. So number 2, where you have no ill will, but have some personal interest in the matter, you shall consult the Rav first, right? So, for example, right, let's say go back to our store owner, right? He has no ill will about that person, never met the person before in his life, right? Person just came to town, sure, he's a great guy, and he'd be happy to, hang out and have herring together, right? but you have an interest, because if it comes out that that person is selling, faulty products, right? So then more people are going to come to your store, right? So it's not so much of an ill will, but it's more maybe of a personal gain. Right? So you have to check yourself out and see that, to make sure that you are actually doing it to help the person and not to help yourself. Right? And it's a scenario, as we mentioned before, right? You have to speak to Rav to see what you're allowed to say, what you're not allowed to say, because every scenario will be different. Depends on what is happening. It depends on what the job is. Right? That depends, what is wrong with the other person that is doing. And if you're a person guilty of the same misdeed, it is impossible for you to, right? It tends to be constructive. And let's say you do the same thing, right? So that person, they schmooze in shul all the time. It's so hard davening behind them. But you're the biggest schmoozer, not the biggest schmoozer, but you're also a schmoozer, right? In shul, right? You also talk during davening. Okay, maybe not as much as the other person, and maybe not as frequent, but you're faulty also. You've many times schmoozed with people and talked, and so then how can you go ahead and say about that person of what they're doing, right? So if you have that same problem, right, so then you can go ahead. And if the person you are going to tell does the same misdeed, you're not allowed to tell, right, because he or she will think nothing wrong was done, right? So if that person also does that, right, so you are telling Chaim Yankel that Moshe, is a schmoozer in shul, I'm just using that example, right? And therefore, maybe, we shouldn't get aliyahs, because maybe you should try to get him not to come to shul, because it's really ruining the davening, or, tzipora is whatever. It doesn't make a difference who it is, right? That person might not think it's such a bad thing, because he's also a schmoozer. She's also a schmoozer, or she dresses the same way that person dresses, and you want to talk about the way it's just not good, the way you dress, or something that they do, or the way they talk. They always speak foul language. That person also speaks foul language, and whatever it is, right? If that person does the same thing, right? So then they might not think it's something wrong, and then what you're doing, there's no toelas, because the person's not going to gain anything by you telling them that thing. Any questions on that? Okay. And if this number 6 we sort of talked about, if you can get the same result without speaking Lashon Hara, you have to use that option. All right. And the last one, right? You cannot convey the information if it will result in the person suffering a greater loss than the halachas would impose. Right? Think carefully about the consequences, right, will be for the person you are reporting about. All right. So, for example, the person's store. Right. So you can say, oh, that person, he has faulty product. Was in there and the milk was spoiled. Right. Maybe his refrigerator, maybe he just, doesn't look at the dates. And so, maybe that one thing is true, but people will stop coming to the store completely. And then all the other things that he bought, he will gain a tremendous loss, go out of business. Right. Or an individual with this babysitter example, right, that we're talking about. So maybe you had one thing, but if you start saying all the things that the person did, right, it's going to haunt them for the rest of their lives. It's not only the babysitter, but other things and jobs, and people start smoozing, and it's a gossipy town, even though we're working on Lashon Hara. But unfortunately, and other people are not, and the word's going to spread, and it's going to be more than just people are not going to hire him or her for a babysitter, but it's going to start hurting the person emotionally, and it's going to start, people are going to start talking in school, and the people are going to shul, and they're going to start avoiding, and this and that, and it could really harm the person, for the rest of their life, and they did something silly when they're a teenager, right? One time, even twice, but they did something silly, right? So you have to be very careful, and you have to put into consideration, right, what will be the consequences for the person that you're talking about. And is it within halachic ramifications of what that person could lose or not? And again, that's something that you might have to speak to Rav about, right? Because, as I said, even this babysitter thing, right? If you go ahead and say, well, they came to my house and they trashed the house, all their friends came and this and that, and the kid was a kid, and they were wrong, 100%, right? But listen, they're teenagers, and you just went ahead and you spoke to them, or you went and told their parents, and this and that, and not bad mouthing them, even though someone asks you, no, tell us, right? and the parents would have had a good conversation with them and say, hey, listen, you can't do that. The parents will tell, listen, you cannot babysit now for, you know, for the next year until you grow up and mature and learn your lessons and things like that. But instead, you go ahead and tell the next person that asks you, oh, I heard you had, you know, whatever her name is for as a babysitter. What do you think? Oh, she's such a, oh my gosh, and now the word starts spreading. The girl's rude. Right, the girl emotionally could get ruined, or you know, other things, and it could ruin a family. Right, so you really have to think about the consequences of our action to make sure that it actually fits to what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. So I think this is a very good, you know, sort of chart. I have another one with breaks it down a little differently, but the time is getting late, and I think that. If anybody's interested in this, I'll be happy to email it to them or WhatsApp it to them. Feel free to you know, message me and ask for it. But there's other charts out there that are slightly different, but I think this is a good sort of thing to reflect on. I'm going to stop the recording.